Good morning. Well, actually, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the talent management session of day one of our annual conference here at ICCC. Thank you so much for being here. We've got a wonderful keynote speaker here for you today. I'd like to begin by introducing myself. My name is Jared Jones. I'm gonna ask if everyone could please put themselves on.
Yes, who's calling?
My name is Jared Jones. I'm a program coordinator and data analyst here at Interstate Capital Connections. I've been here for 2 years. I've worked with a couple of you all in Chicago, Detroit, Memphis, and Baltimore as well. So before we begin, I want to run through a few housekeeping reminders. I'd like everyone here to rename themselves with their full name, as well as the name of their organization. So if you go down and rename yourself on the Zoom, please. Additionally, I'd like to ensure that for the sake of camaraderie and what we're trying to do here, that everyone have their camera on if possible, and ensure that you are on mute. When we go into breakout sessions, although this particular speaker doesn't have a breakout session, take yourself.
We've got a blender.
I also like y'all to use the chat box to ask your questions. The ICIC team will compile and ask them of the speakers. We'll probably be trying to ask them relatively live, as opposed to all at once at the end. So please don't hesitate to use the chat box to ask your questions. If desired, you may turn on closed captioning by clicking the closed caption button in the Zoom toolbar. You can also toggle to the Spanish language live simultaneous translation by clicking the interpretation button on the Zoom toolbar to switch languages. To the extent that we can, we will share recordings and materials from the sessions after the conference is over. Now that we've covered some of the housekeeping rules, I'd like to begin to introduce our speaker for the day, Dobbin Bookman. Dobbin works with the Harvard Business School's Global Owner-President Management Program, which is geared towards business owners and owner-operators of family businesses from around the world who are looking to develop leadership skill and grow their business. In addition to this, his MBA from Harvard Business School, he also earned an MSc from the Harvard School of Public Health with a focus in health policy, management, and finance. Prior to his shift to leading Harvard's owner management programs portfolio, he served for 10 years as a director in executive education at the school. His industry experience includes healthcare, finance, private equity, venture capital, energy, real estate, and franchise quick service restaurants. Dobbin has served as Harvard MBA career coach, adjunct member of the HBS Career and Professional Development Program, Harvard Business Publishing Corporation's learning team, and adjunct faculty at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Away from Harvard Business School, Dobbin has co-founded 4 startups and does private strategic consulting and development work for leading teams and organizations globally. And with that said, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker here, Dobbin Bookman.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you to your team at ICCC, and thank all of you all who made the choice. And I will note that today there was a choice. Usually we don't have concurrent sessions running, but I appreciate all of you all who have decided to join us today. And I hope, and I'm pretty confident, that by the time we get to the end, you will feel like it was time well spent. So again, I always say this at the beginning: hold me to that. So I'm really delighted to engage with you all about this idea of decoding retention and engagement. I think we'll all agree an extraordinary amount has sort of changed, and we've undergone a lot in the last 12 months, even over the prior 12 months, thankfully. I think we would all agree to that. But one thing that I have observed in my conversations over this period with folks like yourself is that the challenge of building, retaining, engaging good people is pervasive. It stays. It has not changed. And if you are one of the leaders of an organization who has your dream team intact, I'm certain that you spend a fair amount of time thinking about, if not concerned, if not worried about maintaining that and losing those folks, or at least keeping them engaged. And if you are in a position where you're, don't have that yet, like most people or a lot of companies, and you're still kind of in that fight, or you have, a great team that's forming, but you're looking to continue to build and fortify that. You probably think about that often as well. And so what I want to do with the 90 minutes, and we have 90 minutes today, normally we have 75 minutes, is to really go deep and long into the science of a term that you've heard me reference before. I'm sure if you've heard my sessions, and the term is talent optimization. So I want to go headlong and deep into the science of talent optimization, or TO, as you'll hear me refer to it as we move through this. And so I really kind of want to start there. And I'd love for you to sort of think about what we're going to talk about. And as I always say, try to overlay yourself and your own situation and context to what it is that we're describing and we're discussing. Okay, so let's, with that, move forward into the next session here. So if we think about the task at hand that each of you have within earshot of my voice relative to the leadership and coordination of your organization and your teams, it's in essence and simply to move from the left side of this slide to the right side of this slide. And hopefully you have both ends of this slide fairly well defined. So if you look at the left side, you're seeing your business strategy. And that's something that hopefully you're clear about, and that everyone that works with you has some clarity around. And if not, you can start there. And then you have a clearly and well, I think, thought set of targets or objectives that you have, that everyone is sort of moving toward. And so those are the two sort of building blocks that are the base components. And if you don't have that, you need to get that. But I think let's assume we all have that. And now the question becomes, what bridges the gap between these two? What is the link between your business strategy, the thing you're clear about, and the results you're after? And if you think about it, it's pretty simple. It's your people, right? And everything that kind of goes around that comes with that. And in many cases, hopefully most cases, this is great because this is how you get things done, through the human capital capacity of your organization. But in many cases, and at least some of the time, in all cases, there is miscommunication. There's sort of disaggregation. There's conflict. There's lack of trust. There's, turnover, lack of engagement at its base. And these are all things that also come with the territory of dealing with people, for good or bad. And so I have sort of termed that group of things, that package of experiences that come with that, sort of the people tax, when you're dealing with it in this context. And so if you think about a scenario where you do have a people tax, you can see pretty clearly and easily that it's not a stretch to think that you might be introducing some execution risk relative to your strategy, right? Because it's the people who are executing. And if that's not perfectly intact, you're going to have some execution risk. And likewise, if you have execution risk, you're going to have probably some business result target risk, some issues with perhaps missing your targets. So this is the base frame that we're starting with. And I want you all to kind of think about this relative to the people piece in the middle, because that's really what it is that we're focused on. And I'll say this at the outset. And I always like to say this, all organizations deal with this, no matter the size, scope, industry, whether it's you and one other person, or you and 20 or 50 other people. Every organization deals with the dynamics of the interactions between the people who are there to do the work to link the business strategy to the business results, right? So let's think about how we can be deliberate about that, and how we can use data and the processes available to you to manage across this risk in these three domains. I'm hearing a little bit of echo. I'm going to ask everyone to confirm that in the bottom left-hand corner, your little microphone has a little red line through it, that you've muted yourself, if everyone hasn't done that. That way we can hear, and then when you get ready to chime in for questions and comments, we can make sure we hear everyone there. So if you look at the same frame I showed you, and you think about what you already have, which is this idea of the business strategy and the
Professor
business
Bookman?
results. Yes.
I apologize to disrupt. We're unable to see your slide set.
Oh, you can't see my slide. You know what? I have not shared my slides yet. That
Just
is
double
amazing.
checking. Thank you, Professor.
Let me do this then. Let me go back. Thanks for that. I got so carried away I didn't even share my slide. All right, here we go. Get that out. All right, now I'm assuming you can see.
Yes, sir. We can see them. Thank you.
Okay, good enough. So there was the cover slide. You haven't missed anything there. What I was showing you that you probably were wondering, what is he talking about, the left slide and the right side? That was this slide. And so you've got your business strategy on the left, business results on the right. And then I clicked and showed you the people that link them in the middle and everything that sort of goes with that. All right. And then we described the issues that go with people as a people tax potentially, and the fact that introduction of a people tax also introduces risk with your execution of your strategy, and then by relation, the possibility of risk in missing and making your targets. So that's kind of where we are up to this point. And then sort of taking that challenge that you have to manage across all of these three domains and the people that are in the center, how to use data and the processes available to you to kind of think about that strategically and deliberately. And in order to do that, there are really four things, four processes, four steps that you need to do in order to find that. And so the first one is to diagnose, right? And it's an interesting term. It's a medical term, diagnose. And it's the way we think about it is it's the same way the medical profession thinks about it, to go in, to really look at the situation, do a diagnostic of yourself, the people, the context, the container, everything, the culture, the teams, and understand what the dynamics are. And there's a methodology to it. The second component and thing you need to do is you need to then design the job, the work, and the system in order to get the work done, right? So you need to think strategically about what do we need to put in place in order to design to get this system to work the way we need it to work. The next thing you need to do, step 3, is you need to hire the human capital in order to, hopefully with the capacity that's required in order to meet the needs of the objectives that you've defined, in order to come in and engage in order to do that work well. And again, you need to drive this, or people on your team need to drive these recruits in. The next step is to inspire, right? And so this is the job of everybody in the organization, not just you, not just your managers, but each individual in the organization to inspire themselves and one another, and for you to sort of be the leader of that and preside over that. All right. So these are the 4 steps. And then you start over again with, again, diagnosing and looking at the situation and seeing where you are and making adjustments that you need to make as you go. A huge part of talent optimization is the efficient sort of application of this towards this idea of really efficient and effective engagement, making sure you have all the right people in the right places doing what it is that you are clear about wanting them to do, and you've been really deliberate and data-driven in your decision making. And that's what we're going to walk through. Before we do that, I want to double click on each one of those steps that I just described so that you can kind of see yourself what they are. And you'll hear and see that this mirrors what I basically said. You diagnose first, you then have to design, right, hire, and then inspire. And you know what each one of those components is about. So think about that. And while you're thinking about that, as sort of as a context or a container holder, I'm going to give you this mnemonic or this idea or formula. Try to visualize it. Me, M-E. And then me plus 1. So it's, when I say me, I mean you, me, you, yourself, individual. And then me or you plus 1. So the dynamic between the two of you, if that's 2 colleagues, a manager, someone that's on your team, me plus 1, and then me plus we, which is the entire organization or team that you're on. And so each one of those dynamics require you to understand each of the components of that. So me, you have to understand yourself, the people with whom you're dealing, and then the dynamics of the team. So that's where we're going with this. And I want you to kind of think about that stepwise progression as we think about this idea of the process of talent optimization. So this screen, I know for sure, all of you who have heard me in the last 12 months or so have seen, probably prior to that. Because I've had it subliminally in every session that I've done. I've actually shown this slide and tried to make a definition of it. But let me just refresh everyone's memory of it. Again, talent optimization, or TO as it's referred to, is equivalent of, and I don't know if you know Michael Lewis and Moneyball. Some of you may have read this book or seen the movie. It's actually a movie now. This talent optimization is the Moneyball for business, in essence, and you'll see that by the time we get to the end of it. It's a set of scientists who've come up with a methodology for understanding at a very high and next level the insights that drive the talent and capacity of your teams and the dynamics that drive those. And so that's what I want to give you some insight into. Sorry, I think I'm moving this past here. Let me, this is another one that is familiar because I've described these forces before to you around engagement, in that context of the conversation of engagement. And the reason I want to highlight them here is because a lot of what we do with talent optimization, in fact, the essence of it is rooted in the basis of the dynamics across each four of these. So if you think about job fit, we've talked about that. That's, in essence, your fit, an individual's fit with the job. And there's a lot that goes into that. You can look at that. There's manager fit, right? The dynamics between you or the manager and subordinate, and understanding the dynamics there and how folks communicate and their styles and how they're driven and motivated. Team, same. And then culture, organizationally, the whole organization and your fit with that is a whole nother domain and dimension that needs to be explored. And we're going to look at each one of them sort of distinctly by the time we get to the end of this. But this is sort of the context and the format that we're dealing with this. And so you really want to try to understand what the impact of each of these forces is on every individual in the organization and as they correlate. So that's what I want to begin to kind of illustrate for you a little bit. So let's look at this. This next few infographics essentially show, yes. You all hear me? Okay, these next few infographics show time on the x-axis along the bottom, and it shows the level of engagement along the y-axis, sort of top to bottom along the left here. And what you also see is a line depicting what is the minimum job requirements for any given job, right? And then you also have the line that depicts an individual's level of engagement and effort over the period of time that this graph depicts. And you can see that it starts out at the base and sort of rises up to the midpoint and then kind of continues to rise until it gets to this point of minimum job requirement, and it kind of sits there and rides out over time. So I'm sure we can all sort of visualize what these individuals might look like at work. You probably worked with some individuals like this before. Maybe you have some in your company, maybe you don't, but at least you have a sense for who they are. And I don't want you to think that this is has to be super obvious, like these are people who are always late and slacking off and are stealing pencils and all this kind of stuff. That's not necessarily what this looks like, although it can look like that. But it can also look very much like, effective work, people doing what it is that they've come there to do. No, shenanigans. They're just there about the business. And then when the bell rings, they're out, and they don't think about it again until they come back. There's nothing wrong with that. That's there. But that's sort of, the base minimum. That's the base requirement. The other thing I started thinking about as I was putting this together is you've probably all seen and read recently about this new term called quiet quitting. And if not, you can Google it and see what it's about. But in essence, this is another interpretation of that, right? The minimum base job requirement is what is required for you to do what you need to do in order to collect your check and not get fired and basically, think about other things when you're not there. Long-winded explanation of that. Then you have this other person, right, who is not the have to, but the sort of want to worker, the really engaged worker. And you've probably seen these people as well. So they come in and throughout the entire time, they're always on this sort of upward trajectory relative to their engagement. They're totally engaged. They're helping plan the holiday party, all of that stuff. So you've got these two individuals. So here's the question, and here's what's really important here, is what the implications of the forces of engagement or disengagement, as the case is often, are on these two trajectories and on the individual paths of these folks. And so if you look at kind of each one of the drives that I talked about, job, manager, team, and sort of organizational culture in terms of fit and drivers of engagement or disengagement, you can see actually that if it's disengagement, what ends up happening is that activity brings the engagement level of the high performers down. And you also maintain pressure on those folks who are already doing the bare minimum to kind of stay where they are. So you see that. But the idea is to really turn this upside down such that you are having a pull-up force, right? So that these things are reinforcing one another and you're able to really drive effective communication and engagement across each of these domains, job, manager, team, and organization, to an extent that it actually pulls up the level of engagement of both the want to folks, but also some of the have to folks, and gets them more involved, or at least gets you clear about who's in and who's out so that you can make some pretty clear and strategic decisions around that. So that's the idea that we're moving into.
Hey, Dom, we have a question from the audience. Sorry. So Elizabeth asked, what strategies do you use to plan on scaling your business? How do you balance executed business in the pipeline against having people ready to deploy as business comes in?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's sort of building the bridge as you're crossing it. And it's really the art and skill of being a leader. You have to do that. But here, I will say in a short sort of self-serving way, I am going to give you you're going to see by the end of this, some very methodical approaches to doing this in a way that gets you kind of what you need. And so the reality is, I think having conversations, understanding what your human capital capacity is, and that's always about a conversation and sort of understanding where people are engaged and not. And then the second step is just understanding, kind of what the drivers of those levers of engagement are for each person. And that's kind of the skill and the time consuming part, so that you can build an effective team that matches at each target point. And I'm going to show you that as we move through it. Before we do that, I'm going to run through the next several slides just to flash up some statistics. I just want to flash some things that we've found that have impacted folks that are kind of dealing with this. And I want you to think about whether or not you can resonate with this, or this is not your experience. And it's fine. It's great if it's not. If it is, it's common, but I want you to kind of put yourself in these positions each time we go from this, because I think, as we say here, these are real issues that need to be addressed, and when they're addressed, you get real impact from them. So, firstly, only 55% of companies have a strategy to fix this problem. They're just not thinking of it. They're thinking about it. They appreciate it because they feel the impact of it, but they're focused on what the last person just asked. You got to, make the donuts, as they used to say. I mean, you got to get up and do what you got to do. You can't be really thinking about this unless you've got a system to do it. And I want to kind of talk to you about that. Second thing, 98% of CEOs don't pay attention to engagement data, even when it's there. And that's what it is that I think is the lost opportunity. And that's what I want you to tee up around. When people are engaged, you see real clear impact and drivers that come from that, as opposed to companies where people are not engaged. I don't think I have to make this sell to you. You can kind of see that, right? Only 12% of companies align their talent strategy with their business strategy. So that's that slide I showed you. Only 12% align sort of their people in the middle part with their kind of business strategy in order to achieve the results that you're teed up to do. Not many people do that. And it's such an easy thing to think about and to be deliberate about. And there's just so much that comes from it if you do it. We call these companies talent optimized companies, and there are a lot of them out there that have gone through this. They outperform the companies just by far, companies that don't have this and that have not been really successful or strategic about their approach to this. And, we've got data to back that up. These companies have lower turnover, meaningfully lower turnover. And it's obvious because you've got folks engaged. That part makes sense. Higher employee performance. That's what you're after. You're after efficiency and impact from everyone. And it's easy to put people against objectives. And it's also easy to miss the inefficiency that exist and arise from that until you see the efficiencies come out the other end that you could have. And that's what I want to show. Grassroots or Glassdoor and just your reputational impact in the market is driven also by this, as people kind of look for these drivers and fits and fields when they're in the marketplace around this. And you'll know it when you see it, as I'll show. in general, if you get this right, you don't have to spend the time that most leaders spend thinking about people, which is, by and large, what people think about that are in your seats. They think about, their people primarily, and the issues that come around that impede the other things they need to be thinking about. And so getting this right affects that. This was interesting, and I think this changes and certainly has changed, I think, maybe over the last 12 months a little bit, but very recently, the number of folks we surveyed said that only about half of the hires that were made in the last 12 months or so were what they would call impact hires. They were hires that were made out of, need for other things, just sort of balancing the supply demand of workers and employers that have been, that's been sort of mismatched as of late. But I thought that was an interesting finding. Yeah, I mean, this gets at the heart of what you can solve with talent optimization right here, because it's back to the data question. Wouldn't data be helpful here? I mean, literally before you get to a point where you discover that someone's either behavioral, aspects or their cognitive abilities are not where you need them to be for the role you have them in. And so that's the key to matching that. Last one. Most people don't have a very systematic process for doing even the basics, the hiring, the recruitment, retention, engagement, and development, deployment. They don't even have a systemized approach for that. People kind of do that in a hodgepodge way. And so this also gives you a very repeatable, systemized way to approach this with everyone so that you can standardize your results. So let me start making the case for that as we move forward.
We got one more question, but
yes,
you may have answered it. You may have answered it. Kathleen asked, I read someone describing quiet firing, where managers fail to look out for and develop their staff. Do you have thoughts on the best prevention and reversal for that?
Yeah, I have heard that term maybe once. I think I read it and heard it once, and I'm not sure I fully get what that is. I think my understanding of it is well, first of all, let me understand your question first. Can you repeat I want to make sure I understand the question, because I think I do based on the context of that. What is the question? How do you prevent what? Quiet firings from happening? Because you have full control over that. I want to make sure I'm understanding the question.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think the question is saying that how do you as a manager not quiet fire or assure that you're not quiet firing?
Yeah, good question. You want to avoid both of those. I think the first one's easier to do, easier. You can make sure you don't do quiet firing, because I think that's kind of a cop out in a way. I mean, you're the leader, you're in a position, if you're in a position to quiet fire someone, so to speak, you're also in a position to really embrace them and engage them in a way that gets them to drive harder and more passionately toward the objective that you've been clear about. And so you can either quiet fire them or you can do that. The latter is harder, so easier to quiet fire. To prevent yourself from being quiet fired, I think you have to start with that individual. You have to look and be introspective about your level of engagement in the work you're doing. And admittedly, over the last 12 months, a lot of people have appreciated the fact that they didn't love what it is that they were doing to the extent they wanted to keep doing it. And they stopped. They did other things or are doing other things. And so that's huge. That's great. And I think all of this is about a process of really asking questions to yourself and your teams and your subordinates and your boss, and understanding where the correlation is around that. All right. So let me move us forward. This slide, again, is sort of an overview of the 4 steps: the design, desire, hire, inspire, and against and over the drivers of engagement and disengagement, sort of the domains of that, as we've talked about, just as a recap. But the thesis here, though, is that real change in engagement and retention and all of this happens at 2 levels: the individual level, as we've been talking about, and at the sort of group level. So let's take some time to dig into both of those, starting kind of with the individual. Okay. So if you think about any individual in any organization, they're in a container, right? They're in this workplace, whether it's virtual or sticks and bricks, they're there. And you have impacts, that impact that person's capacity to do what it is they do. And they're either sort of constricting impacts, or they might be liberating impacts in an ideal world that allow people to really feel free. But let's, if it's going great, then you don't have to deal with this. Let's talk about the down scenario where it's not. So you've got this situation, you've got a container, and you've got to understand the impact on these individuals. So now let's get into some of the digging into the data that allows us to understand that and make decisions around that, right? And so what it is that we use is called the predictive index. You've seen some of this in the base of the slide here. And there are various assessments that you do, and they're very short, that you engage in with your team, that you undergo and that you do sort of collectively, that allow you to collect what you need in order to make some of these decisions that you need to make. So let me walk you through kind of how this works at a high level, and then we'll drill down into it a little bit further. So essentially what we're doing is we're managing and measuring three things, right? Your drives, your needs, as well as the behaviors. Now, the third, the behaviors, are easier because you can see what people do at work. You can see behaviors, right? But you can't see drives, what drives me, and you can also not see what it is that I need from you in order to make me feel good about staying here and being effective, or vice versa. So we need to have a mechanism for standardizing and understanding that, right? So imagine you have these four domains that we're looking at, and these are the four things that we start with in terms of measuring. The dominance is sort of a factor, right? So let me give you an idea what that is. So the dominance is essentially the extent to which an individual needs to or wants to exert their influence on situations and events, period. And we'll get more into it, but that's what dominance is. Extroversion, people kind of get that because, if you're an introvert or an extrovert, it's really not that, but it's that you can think about it that way. Extroversion is really the drive for social interaction in this case, but that's also a very shorthand. It's much more than that. And you'll get it when we get to some of the examples, but it's essentially your capacity and ease with which you engage with individuals around things. Patience is the other thing we measure. And patience is really a measure of one's either drive for, need for, or behavior as consistent or stable. You need consistency and stability, or you are very consistent and stable, and you'll get that as well. The last one is formality. And formality is really about rules, regulations, policies, structures. And you can imagine, hopefully as you're seeing these, in thinking about yourself, you can probably see yourself along this continuum somewhere for each one of these about how you are. And then it doesn't take you long, if you can do that, to see that there are probably, a dozen to 20, different sort of patterns that you can group around where people are. Actually, many more than that, because it's like a thumbprint or a fingerprint, but you can group them in terms of categories, which we will show you as we move forward. But I want you to just first think about these base parameters as the drives that we need to measure to help us understand individual drives, needs, and behaviors, as well as organizational drive, needs, and behaviors. And that's where it really gets interesting. So now let me show you an example of an individual here and what an individual's profile might look like after you ask this set of questions. And it's a very structured set of questions that give this output to you. But let's assume that we are looking at this individual and that, once we measure for them, they end up with their A, and A was the first, the dominance you see there. That's the letter that represents dominance. You see A, B, C, D, was here. Now, you notice along the bottom, you can see, let me get my little highlighter here. You can see these little dots here, right? And along the bottom, these represent sort of degrees of intensity. So from low, as you see here, all the way to high. You'll also notice that in that prior slide, there was kind of a crescendo. It was getting bigger as you move to the right. So as you move to higher levels of intensity on any of these four dynamic parameters, that need or drive or behavior is accentuated for you. So this is this individual. Let's, for example, their extroversion tendency, their need or comfort with socializing might be sort of at this midpoint where this B is. And then you might go further and find that on the patient's parameter, the thing that really describes their need for consistency and stability might be really low. Because if you really need that, meaning you really need structure, you're all the way over to the right. But this person's all the way over to the left. That means they don't need a lot of structure and consistency and stability. They're like, renegade. They can be all the way over here. Here's this person in terms of formality. Now, formality, you remember, was about rules and regulations and policies and feeling like you need to have that or you need to give that to your people. It's either way, needs or drives, or you display that. You go around keeping people on point with things. Then you're all the way to the right again here on formality. But you'll see this individual is to the left of this midpoint, this little arrow here. He's to the left of that, or she's left of that. So now you've got this odd looking pattern, and sort of if you connect the dots, it looks like that, right? And interestingly, there's a term for this pattern. As I mentioned, this is actually called a Z pattern, and there are different forms of it based on how intense your Z is. But this is a pattern. And there are very distinct behaviors and characteristics associated with people with this pattern. And depending on how intense A, B, C, and D are in each direction, you can really characterize how someone is going to be driven, what they're likely to need in terms of their team dynamic, and how they might behave if they're a boss or a member of your team. And so that's starting to get to the science of what I'm talking about. So now let's move further. I'm going to get you even deeper into it. So you remember I mentioned job fit, this idea of fit with the job. And again, it drives either engagement or disengagement. So let's look at fit first. Let's look at the job and try to figure out how we can overlay this same framework to the job of inside sales hunter. And I picked this because most folks know kind of what sales is, and they know what inside sales is versus outside. So the inside sales is the person on the phone who's sort of engaging with people to do sales. They're not sort of running about out in the world. They're inbound and they're or outbound, but they're in your organization and they're doing inside sales and they're hunting. This is a hunter as opposed to a farmer. They're hunters and farmers. Hunters go out and hunt, and farmers cultivate. They take what you have and they cultivate, and they go deeper and go deeper. So you've got these two types of salespeople, under one job of sales with very distinct characteristics and very different needs and drives and behaviors for success. So let's take this inside sales job, this hunter, and here's some characteristics that we think, and based on our assessment of this job and what we know about our company, is required for success. And there's a process for that. It's not just something we pulled out. It's quick to connect, people that are quick to connect, people who are natural jugglers, someone who can do a lot, who can take something in and kind of move with the customer as they're needing. Goal-oriented, right? Because you're a salesperson. Most salespeople are goal-oriented. They want to make that sale. They want to hit that quota. Risk-tolerant. Most salespeople are pretty risk-tolerant as well, because a lot of sales is not cushioned. It's, commissioned, or you're kind of out there. And self-driven, right? Self-motivated. Now, by no means is this an exhaustive list. This is just some things that characterize what it is that we're looking for in this job of sales hunter. And again, this may be different from what you need in your company as a sales hunter, and we'd have to go through that process and come up with what those things are. But for this, it's here. Now, you saw this frame before. Same thing we've been looking at in terms of the 4 parameters, right? Now, let's look at how we might recommend a behavioral profile for this. What might be the profile of the individual we're looking for based on this job and these needs that we've articulated? So I'm going to show you another Z pattern, except for this one's going kind of in a little bit of a different direction, but it's a Z pattern nonetheless, and you can see it. And you can see also that, A, B, C, and D are at different parts on this relative to low, medium, and high. And it gives you a pretty distinct kind of pattern of what it is that you're looking for here. So if you look at what this role might look like, you want someone who's probably moderately high on the dominance factor, meaning they're not afraid to kind of impose their ideas and thoughts on someone as you're thinking about a sale. They're eager to exercise that influence. They're also probably not afraid of rejection, so they can kind of deal and bounce back with communication. They might be higher on the extroversion scale, like we show here. Someone who can quickly and easily connect. They can drive social interactions. They're not going to have an issue with kind of quickly jumping in action when you need to around conversations for these sales. On the patient side, consistency and stability, remember, sales is anything but stable or consistent most of the time, right? So if someone needs that, this probably isn't the job for them. So this person, as you see, is real far to the left. That means they don't have a need for that. They're kind of loose and able to roll with it as far as that. On the formality side, now, again, this is about rules and structure, and you have to be careful here because you don't want people that are all the way to the left of this, because then they don't have any regard for rules and structure. But you need to understand kind of where this is. This person's kind of close to the midline, but still to the left. That's not bad. But this is just a base profile for this job if we were going to market with it. So now let's go to the other side of the coin with that same sort of scenario. And let me introduce you to Heather here, who is a sales professional. She's actually a real sales professional. This is Heather. She is a hunter. She is not a farmer. She is a hunter, not a farmer. A hunter goes out, as we said, and brings stuff in. A farmer cultivates and goes deeper with the folks we already have. She's very intelligent. She's bilingual. She has an MBA. She's super successful. But these are her characteristics, right? She seeks results. She's a perfectionist. She really likes perfection. She takes her time with things. She's task over people. That means you're more, task oriented than you are people focused. And there are people you can probably imagine that are like that are really good with tasks and not super great with people. And she's a bit slower to connect on things. So if you think about her profile, and this is actually her profile. Now, this looks totally different than a Z. It doesn't look like a Z at all. But this is her profile, another very distinct profile. And as you can see, there could be variations of this. But she's all the things this profile shows, right, in a very clear way. She's, as far as the dominance, she's not super far to the right. She's kind of, doesn't mind not being the dominant person in the conversation. On the extroversion side, she's way past the midline on the left, as I mentioned. She's on the patience. She takes her time. She's in the midline. I could see, based on her being even further to the right, because she does like to take her time, and she, is methodical about things. And then on the formality, she likes kind of guidelines, structure. She likes understanding where the numbers are, and it's really helpful to get that to her in terms of her effectiveness. And all of that kind of shows up in this diagram that you see for her. So let's continue and make it even more interesting. So if we look at Heather against the job that she's in, and you look at how we match these two up. So Heather's the individual, the position's at the bottom. And so we've done the same sort of exercise of kind of coming up with the characteristics of the individual against the job. So this is the job she's in, right? So I just moved her down so that you can kind of see her overlaid to the job. Now, the first thing I see when I look at this is a lot of difference. And that's kind of the first thing I want you to pattern yourself to do, is you look for the differences, the things where there are potential disconnects. So starting at the top, A is not that far off, right? They're pretty close on A, but look at B. Look at the difference between B, where she is, and where the job requirement is that we came up with. Now look at C, where she is relative to the job requirement that we came up with. And look at this, not huge, but there's a little bit of a disconnect. But B and C are meaningfully different enough that you need to be aware of that, and understanding the dynamics that drive Heather and the needs for success in this position give you some clarity into how you might engage with her around staying in this role or doing something different. And so this is, again, a base of how we match the person with the job. Now, let me continue with this type of example, but move to management impact now, right, relative to disengagement. And this is about the misalignment or alignment between self, the individual, and the manager, as the name implies. So as we move, this is a key point for managers. It's different for individuals. Remember, I said it measures needs, sort of drives and behavior, drives, needs, and behaviors. For management style, when you do this assessment for a manager, the highest of the four, whatever the highest one is, the one furthest to the right, is the one that is the greatest predictor of your management style. Okay. That's good information to know. So let me give you some examples of that are maybe extreme, but you can kind of see what I mean and why that's helpful to know. So there's Elon Musk, right? Folks, kind of, he's been in the news lately, but he is extraordinarily authoritative. You can tell by how he's handled Twitter and a lot of things. You can Google all of this, but he's very dominant in terms of his imposition of himself and his thoughts on situations that he's in. That's how he moves. You take someone else, though, like Martin Luther King, for example, who was an orator and was very persuasive, was very able to connect and sell an idea and a dream and a vision based on communication. And so you get someone like this. You have Steve Jobs, for example, an engineer, a perfectionist, someone who, I don't know if you all remember, Apple products used to notoriously be late and delayed, not because they didn't know what they were doing, but because Steve Jobs was a perfectionist and it wasn't right. And so it wasn't going out till it was right. And so that is a characteristic that is kind of demonstrated in this idea of patience beyond just sort of being patient. And then formality. So you may recognize Jamie Dimon. I think he was in the last couple of sessions that I have done with many of you at JP Morgan Chase. He was the guy who didn't believe in Zoom and thought it was bad for the culture and was, checking people's keystrokes to make sure they were logged in when they wanted to, all this different stuff. That is a very structured environment, and a boss who needs that and wants structure and accountability for folks. So that's just an illustration of the different management styles that exist and how you can manage around that, or at least understand what you're dealing with if you're this person, or if you work for this person, or if you're going to hire this person to work with other people in your organization. And it's very easy to see. So as a manager, I'm sure, you're kind of thinking about this. Would you agree, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you as a manager? I hope not, because that's horrible advice in this context. This is the opposite of what you want to do. And it's the reason that, and it's what actually most people do. They hire people that are like themselves. They treat people the way they want to be treated. And, it's not a terrible thing when you think about it. But the reality is it's terrible if you're a manager or a leader and you're expecting folks to all move the same way based on how you move. And that doesn't work. And so this is what this is all about in a meaningful way. So let me keep us moving. Employee needs, same thing as the individual needs, the group needs, right? The highest drive here also predicts the individual's need, where you are with regard to things. So if your highest drive, if I do this assessment for you and you come up with your boomerang or your Z pattern or your straight line or whatever your pattern is, and your highest one, the one furthest to the right, is dominance, then you need impact. You have a need for driving, being around, impact. If you're an extroverted individual or you're really high there, you really have a need to engage. And if you don't have that personal engagement, you're not going to feel full or feel fully, engulfed in the work that you're doing. Patience. If this is your highest one, give them time. You've had people you work with and they're good on the fly, or people you can ask something on the spot in a meeting. If you're high on C, that's not this person. So don't expect them to move quick on the fly. They're going to need some time to kind of, contemplate. And if they're your boss, think about how you act that. If you know this is this person, how do you deal with your boss, right? If you know that, you can be smart about how you interface with them. Same with formality, right? Rules, regulations, policies, fairness, all of that. They want details. You got to explain it. I got to understand it. If I'm the boss, if I'm your subordinate, it's important to know where you are with regard to this. So just giving you examples of how this works. Let me give you another real one here, another case example of how this works in action. Here's Aaron. Aaron's another salesperson, right? Head of sales. He needs feedback, opportunity to influence, and people connection. Just based on what I just said, you kind of have a sense for what his profile might look like. Holly, this is his CEO. She's new. All right. She's super direct. She's very data driven, and she's very sort of task and operationally focused. That's her. Now, let's look at both of their patterns and profiles. They're both boomerangs. And, but they are literally mirror images of each other. I mean, literally. And so let's look at the differences here. So if you look at A, the difference between Aaron and Holly, you look at B, joking, I looked at this, I mean, literally it's a red X. I mean, it's right there on the screen. That doesn't mean this won't work, but there's a lot you need to think about here. Look at C, the difference is there, right? At least they're both left of center. So you're not crossing center, but there's a little difference there. And then, same with D, but the biggest disparities are with sort of the A and the B that you look at here, right? And so you think about this and you start to think, well, what's the worst thing that could happen in this scenario? Well, Holly could ride Aaron until he leaves. Aaron could drive Holly nuts. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that could happen between now and then if this is not understood and well taken care of. And so it's merely data. It's merely something to help you make decisions. By no means does this say, and I don't want you to walk away from this thinking that this cannot work. This works every day of the week in a lot of organizations. It doesn't work optimally unless they're aware of it, and it can derail, but it can work. You can adapt. People can adapt into people's style. This is great.
I
Yes.
just want to let you know about 40 minutes left. 40.
Beautiful. Okay, thanks. Let's keep this moving. It's actually good. All right. Here's something I want you to remember. The employee's needs come first, right? So if you're the manager, which you all are, or the boss, their needs come first. That doesn't mean you need to hurt yourself or subrogate yourself. It just means that you need to really understand what their needs are. And you either need to switch it up and code switch so that you deal with people a different way each time, so that you're being effective, or you need to bring people onto the team that have capacity where you don't, not bandwidth, but they're better at doing that than you so that they can do it and get that done. So that's kind of where I want you to understand that. It's important for you to really know that. All right. The onus is on you. So let's continue here. Let's talk about the team now. This is another real example. This is Dan. Oh, I haven't shown you Daniel. I'm going to show you Daniel in a minute. Really, really interesting example, but of team dynamics at work and how you can really manage in and around this. If you feel like you're really not like your team, or or you have people who feel like they're disconnected, but they're really valuable. All right. So here's Daniel. He's the president, actually, CEO of TechModi. These are his characteristics, right? He's driven. He's super dominant. But he's reserved, which is kind of weird. He's quiet, but he's dominant. He's fast paced, but he's, and kind of intense in his capacity to work. And he is quite formal in terms of his wanting to make sure all I's are dotted and T's are crossed, right? So that's, and by the way, TechModi is a software technology company that also has consultants and professional service providers that go out and work with the software. Okay. So let's look at the team. So far, everything we've been doing is individual. We did look at the job for a bit, but let's look at the team now, an aggregate of individuals. So all these dots that you're seeing here, along with A and B, these dots here are all individuals on the team, right? And what we've done is we've aggregated them and come up with sort of an average team kind of aggregator profile that's weighted based on the intensity right to left without going into too much of that. You can kind of see the sigma degrees to the top there on the graph. But the team itself is highly extroverted. They have quite low attention to detail. And they're really an innovative, think sort of Google, sort of young, kind of really innovative, quick thinking, quick moving. Back in the day, I'll say Google. Google's become much more corporate now, but a very agile organization around this and a quick moving organization. So if you were to plot their diagram, it might look something like this, right? And you just sort of, you kind of aggregated them. Now let's continue with this. So team fit versus sort of behavioral drives. And that's what I want you to kind of understand. So let's overlay Daniel. This is Daniel's team. This is his team. Let's overlay Daniel to that. This is Daniel, right? So you have team and you got Daniel there. Now, again, what's the first thing I do? I look at differences, right? So you got a Z pattern, you got a boomerang, and they're kind of not totally lined up. All right. So what you see here is, Daniel, as I mentioned, super high, much higher influence. He's way higher than the others. He's got a much lower B. He's not really that into socializing and interacting in that regard. He's a pure engineer. Similar on patience, right? There's this, let me highlight these so that you can see the differences there. On patience, and a little more similar, but on formality, there's as well sort of a difference there. So let's continue with this kind of again. So here's my question for you. If these are those two patterns, is this good or bad? I mean, is this, is Daniel poisonous to the team? Is the team poisonous to Daniel? Keep in mind, Daniel's the CEO. So you can't just fire him or push him off in a corner. I mean, he's the reason initially that we all are here, according to them. So good or bad, right? Outlier or savior. My answer to this is that it could be either. You really do have to decide how you're going to leverage this. But if you do it well and you have the data, you might as well leverage it for good. And it can be tremendous because what you now have is a very, very complete team that has a head that's really methodical and focused on the technique and the technology. And then you've got the rest of the organization, which is very agile, is innovative, and is out there finding ways to apply it. And I think it's a brilliant strategy that they've employed because they have really, really been tremendously effective in their capacity to move around in this space, right? So he's actually, there's a term for this particular profile that he has. And I'm not going to go into the details of all of the different patterns and the terms, but the term for Daniel's profile is challenger. So he's one that challenges the group in a way that's effective, and it really works. So let me zoom out for a moment. You guys are probably blind from looking at all these dots. And let me let you guys try this on a little bit, just in your own minds really quickly with the next 2 or 3 slides, and then we'll move on. So call centers, right? Inbound and outbound. We talked about sales. You've got people that take inbound calls, and you got people that call out, right? These are two profiles. Look at them for a second and look at the differences first. They're literally mirror images of each other. And see if you can think in your minds, the self-test, which one of these do you think is the inbound person that receives calls in and what those characteristics would need to be versus someone who has to pick the phone up to call in order to send out. And let me show you which one they are. So the first thing I noticed, A and A are pretty much opposite. B and B are on the opposite lines. C and C are on the opposite lines, and D and D are on the opposite lines, right? Top one's inbound, the bottom one's outbound. Hopefully that made some sense to you as you're kind of looking at that. Let's go to the next one. This is another easier one maybe to think about. Here's a medical one, right? You got a surgeon versus a pediatrician. Now, my wife's a pediatrician, so I'm going to stereotype doctors a bit. I have a lot of them that I'm around a lot. So, but this bears true for at least the surgeons and the pediatricians and folks that I know. Another set of almost mirror images of one another. Which one do you think, looking at it, is the surgeon and why that might be? And which one is the pediatrician, right? So if you think about A versus A here, this person really needing to connect, B, extroversion versus, which one is the surgeon? All right, there's the other one. Now, let me move us on. Now, let's assume that you have this profile or that you want to design kind of a job for this type of a profile. You're trying to attract this individual to your organization. How might you think about doing that based on what you see here? So you see kind of A, B, C, D. You see how collaborative they are versus how independent they are, how reserved they are versus how sort of stable they are, how driven they are versus how steady they are, back and forth. How might you describe this? What are some of the key words that you might use? And so if I look at this, some of the things I think about are consistency, right? Steady pace. They really need time to think and be reflective, probably. Freedom from, kind of office politics. Lots of support in this organization. This person needs a ton of structure and support, sort of step-by-step training. So, how might you think about this job and how might you kind of describe it? Well, as it turns out, this is a real job, and this is an internal corporate accountant. And so you can kind of see how someone with this profile, based on what you know already, might be a good internal corporate accountant. And again, this is not that every internal corporate accountant that's good needs to look this way, but this is data that's helpful for you if you can use it effectively. Last one, this is super interesting. Culture, right? Organization. How do you think about that? Feeling like you're part of or not the organization with which you're in, right? I say this in all my sessions because I like saying it, but it's true. Strategy or culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And I'll say this, culture can kill and eat engagement for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day of the week. So that's how intense it is relative to engagement. So let's think about that and understand the implications of that. And I've got a nice example that kind of illustrates it in a pretty clear and distinct way. So here's a company. It's actually interesting. It's actually Tech Modi. It's actually their company. So here is the company. And many companies are like this, right? They pride themselves on having a culture that has an ability to be efficient and effective across the needs of different types of teams. And that's not always, in fact, usually that's not well done. That's not picked off well. But this particular team does it quite effectively because of Daniel, who has kind of assembled the folks that mirror him. But here's an interesting case that I think you might be able to relate to. You've got developers, of which Daniel is one, and all these other folks that are developers. And you have sort of the management and the other leadership consulting team that are out there doing what it is that they do. And they're very, very different, right? The cultures are very different. So let's look at the management team first and look at what their, and all those dots are the other people in the management team, but this is their pattern. Look at what they might look like, right? Now, let's look at what the developers look like. Again, you've got this profile. It's kind of a summary, but they all kind of look Daniel-ish, even the other dots, but they're over here, right? And we've shown you, let's look here, the differences between the two. You've got the development team, folks over to the left. You've got the management team, folks over to the right. You see them both graphed there, and you see the difference, right? In terms of how they behave. Rules based on the left, patient, structured, heads down. These guys literally, I don't know if you can see, let me go back to this thing. Can you see this? These guys to the left are in the dark. I mean, they literally are in a cave. They like to sit in this room with these computers, and they're in the dark over there. There's not because nobody's over there. And over here, there's light. So there's really difference in terms of how the domains that they even want to occupy, right? And so what do you do with this? I mean, how do you understand this? How do you use this data in order to make this team work effectively? And they do, right? Well, here's what they did. They gave them their own space. So these developers are all the way over here in the dark. I mean, and I've been in other companies where they've done this. You've got people way in this other area in another building that do this. Other people over here, they separated them, created their own subculture. So the culture to the left is way different than the culture to the right. They get there at different times. They leave at different times. They dress differently. They totally different culture. Might as well be two different companies. They also hired someone very deliberately who they use the data around that can bridge the gap. So they have someone that sits in the middle, literally, that communicates with both and is in meetings with both and makes this thing go. And that person has a very specific profile that I'm not going to get into it for the purposes of this, but you can create that, right? That's how this works. So let me show you this. We're getting towards the end here. The world of work, right? So if you think about the world of work, you can break work into 4 quadrants. Maybe more than that, but for the purposes of this, let's say 4 quadrants, right? You can either be about teamwork and employee experience. You've heard me talk about employee experience if you've heard my sessions. You can be about process and precision. That's task and engineers and folks that are like this. Or you can be about innovation and agility, which is quick moving, fast thinking, a lot of agility. Or you can be results and discipline. I say or, it's not or, like one of your combinations of all of these things to degrees. Results and discipline is sort of the 4th, right? And so if you think about this world of work and how you can find yourself and overlay this world of work, I think you end up in an interesting place. And so this first part of this, your job is really to kind of answer 3 distinct questions. The first question is, who am I as a leader? That's what your job is. And so you need to do this, do an assessment, understand whether it's an assessment or not. who you are as a leader, what drives you, what motivates you, what you need, what pisses you off, and how you behave in tense situations and not. You need that. Oops. You also need to know who's on your team, right? You need to do an assessment of the human capital capacity on your team so that you know who's there and what the capacity is. And then the last thing you need to know is what it is your team is there to do. And again, I hope you've been super clear about the business result. And if not, you can do that. What are we here to do, right? And it's not just the result. It's what do you literally need for them to do? You have to understand that. And you may or you may not, right? And so there's a process for that. So the first question is this, right? Who am I as a leader? And so these are some questions you need to answer and ask. And I'm not going to go into them because you can see them here, but you need to answer these questions and understand this and yourself first before you move on to this. Self-awareness is the key here. And it's the thing that drives all of this. And there are tons of blind spots out there that people have. So let's look at how this works with regard to the world of work and this data, back to sort of this idea of using data to understand yourself, your behaviors, your needs and preferences so that you can better lead and correlate across your teams and your people. So here's the leader in this example, plotted sort of here, because each person somewhere on this quadrant in terms of their preferences and how they interact across this. So this leader tends to be a bit more task oriented and not as concerned for process, right? They're happy to let other people do that, right? They're more about, kind of moving things forward relative to tasks and results, So who's on your team? Let's think about the same diagram, right? Who do we have around us? And this is stuff that you can do either before you build a team, which is ideal, but usually doesn't happen that way. You do it after you build a team and you kind of understand where you are and what you need to shore up or make adjustments around. So who's on my team? Here are the questions you need to ask in that regard, right? And so if you look at this, you see, all right, you have this other person that's over here that's really about teamwork, right? So you do have someone on your team that's kind of different than you in a major way, which is good. Because the leader's fast, go, go, go. This individual's more concerned about, hearing every voice and making sure everyone has a turn. And we've thought about everything. We've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, and they want to, and that's great. You really want that. What are the pros and the cons of this, right? So the pros, this individual can help balance the leader and the rest of the team, which is what you want and what you need. The cons are the same thing, right? The lack of drive or move could drive the leader nuts. This person might get fired or my person, might be there to save the company if you give them the chance to understand that. Let's continue building the team out. There are others on the team who are way down here, right, in this process area, and kind of thinking about what they bring to the table and how they balance the leader and the other individual that's up there in the teamwork. So the pros, they can balance each other out. The cons, the leader might see that person as blocking progress, moving things too slowly, right? And then you have another person that's over here right next to the leader, two peas in the pod, as they say, right there. And this can be good too, because you've got someone that kind of thinks like you, that can kind of bounce things and kind of line you up with the other folks. But this is also something to be aware of, because these two people could drive each other crazy. I mean, I don't know if you're too much alike, you knock heads, right? And so you got to really understand who you have around you and what team you're building around you, right? Last one, what does my team need to do? Now, this is important, and this is something you as a leader may have in your mind at some level, but the way you need to have it to understand how to apply it here is with regard to this framework in this context. So if you think about these 4 domains and you think about these purple lines here as levels of sort of intensity in this simple example I'm giving you, you might see, after doing sort of this method of assessment, the fact that your team, your group really needs to be hyper-focused on teamwork in order to make this work and process. Innovation and results are not the focus. It's about teamwork. And it's about process for what our culture and what our success demands. And so if you think about that, and again, you overlay the people we just overlaid to this, you really only have 2 people in this context that are really focused on the left side, and only one of them up at the top where you really need to be focused, and then the one down here. But your manager and this other individual are over here to the right. So again, the question is, what do you do with this? And I say, rather than get frustrated and understand it, understand what you need to shore up to kind of fulfill this, and understand what's around you. So if you bring this back to where we started, and this idea that hopefully you have a very, very clear business strategy that you've articulated, and you have a very, very clear set of results and targets that folks understand and that you've articulated, and that you've gone through the process of diagnosing, sort of designing, hiring, and inspiring folks in your organization to be where they need to be, I think you can fare well in order to not miss your targets. And so in this instance, what you don't know can hurt you, even if it's not hurting you every day in your face. I mean, you can really do better. You can be really efficient with this and avoid paying this high people tax, which then leads to sort of the missed, so the execution risk and then the missed targets. So let's put this into a very simple formula that I want you to kind of remember as I get close to leaving you or opening it up for questions. Here's the formula. You plus the folks around you plus the container, the work that you've put before the group equals your results. Now, I know it's profound. I know it's groundbreaking. It's a very difficult equation, but it's really this simple. I mean, you plus others plus the work equals the results. And so what this does is gives you real clear data and transparency into yourself, you, others, and the container of work in order for you to drive that result that you need. 1 out of 3 of these things won't cut it. If you just have you and you don't understand the others of the work, you're not going to get it. Vice versa. If the work's clear, but you don't know you or the others, you're not going to get there. You got to get all 3 of these. And that's why this is critical at this moment.
I just want to let you know, you have about 18 minutes left.
How many?
18.
Beautiful. Okay, because I'm just about done. This is like the next to the last slide, and then we can have a conversation. I want you to be data driven, right? That's the challenge here. Be data driven in your decision making, in your kind of approach to how you look at this and how you think about yourself and the work that you have your team to do. And I really would like to have you to look at this as a start. And I think this is a place where all of you can really start at least beginning to gather some data that will be helpful for you that you can immediately put to work. And I think, let me start with these 3 questions that I want you to kind of have in your pocket and be able to express to people in your organization, ideally one-on-one when you meet, to try to gather some of this. And just the act of asking the question really does drive the level of engagement up in the organization, because people see the signal that you care, or at least you're signaling that you care. And then the next part of that is taking action. So you have to really map what's going on, right? You have to really understand everything that's happening in your organization so that you can be clear and analyze and come up with a prescribed method for what it is that you need to do. All right. So the second thing, first question is, what can I do? Or what is one thing that I'm currently doing that you'd like to see me to continue to do or stop doing? That's important. What is the one thing that I don't currently do that you'd like me to do more, that I don't do enough? And the last one is, what can I do? And this last one is really important. What can I do to provide to make you more effective in your role? Those are the 3 questions that really can kick this off for you if you allow it. So with that, I'm going to stop my sharing, and I'm happy to engage with you guys. Let me move my other screen over so that I can see you all better. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
That was a lot. Good. No, I'm thank you for being patient. I'm usually much more interested in kind of engaging with folks in person and engaging with folks as we go. But I knew that this was going to be a lot to cover here, and I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me. I finished quicker than I thought I was going to finish. I thought I was going to need more time. But anyway, thank you, Dr. Clutter. Let's hear from folks. Well, first of all, let me ask a couple of questions. I'm going to take the professor first to ask a couple of questions. Then I'd love to hear from you guys. what is it that, is this helpful? Is this stuff that would be helpful? Is this data that any folks are currently using, or data that you're kind of getting at, or any folks using kind of a data approach to any of this? And then again, you can fold in your questions. I'm happy to engage folks a little bit here.
Hello.
Hey, who's that?
Hi, this is Aliyah with Pretty in Paint.
Hey, Freedom Pay. Did you say Freedom Pay?
Pretty in Paint.
Oh, Pretty in Paint.
Company.
Pretty in Paint. Okay.
Paint.
Paint. P-A-I-N-T. Paint.
Yes, sir. Paint.
Got you. I'm sorry about that. What do you do?
No problem. No problem. We specialize in painting, taping, and final cleaning. So drywall, mud and taping, painting, commercial and residential, and final cleaning work.
Okay, that's very useful. I love that. I can use that a lot. I've used that a lot. That's good. You folks like yourself a lot. So Pretty in Paint. I like that.
Yes, sir. Yes.
What's
sir.
your question?
Thank you. So, okay. I'm going to be very transparent, and I'm gonna make this very, very quick. I have been up and running as a WBE MBE for 8 years now. And I am currently going through what I would call a pivotal point in my my business. This information that you all have given, I've attended several conferences, has been wonderful for me, being that I have had as many as 5 or 6 employees, all the way down to it being just me again. And what I'm learning is, based off of people's personalities and what they are strong, as far as their production of work, how they are strong in contributing to a team. What I'm finding is that people seem to be very, very fickle these days. In regards to showing up for work, following through tasks, and just having personal situations that affect the whole team or the whole scheme of what's supposed to happen as far as production is concerned. So like I said, once again, I'm back down to just 3 people working for the company. 2 outfield painters and 1 back office person. But as far as the information that you gave today, no, I have not put it into, I'm sorry, what did you just say to us?
Putting it into practice. Have you used any data or any other types?
Any data, exactly. I have not done that. And I'm thinking maybe that would actually be more beneficial. But how do I go about doing that in the process of hiring? So is there a questionnaire or some type of, something that they can fill out to say, well, these are my personal attributes,
Mm-hmm. That's exactly how it works. That's literally exactly how it works. There's so you someone like myself or someone like me comes in, works with you and your team, your leader team, or whatever teams you have starts with you. Very short assessment of kind of you, and then we work with you and your team to understand what the work is, really understand as a group what the work is, and agree and come to consensus with that. And then we come up with a profile of that. Then you look at each job and look at what everybody is in the room. It's a process. It takes a while, but you go through and you do everybody, you do every team, you do every part, but to your question about hiring, yes, you can, there are companies that use this, and I don't know if you've ever interviewed with a company that had you do a behavioral assessment, but this is what they're doing. I've done it. You don't know what they're doing, but they're, they ask you to fill out a questionnaire, seem some simple questions, what, your preferences for this behavior, sort of interview questions, and they come up with an assessment. Like this, and this is how they use the data. So that's exactly what they do.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a question I had also. I mean, I've never seen anything like this before. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
My name is Willie Ellison. I'm the CEO of Sapphire Marketing.
Hey, Willie, how
I
you doing?
start
What do you guys
this-
do?
Public relations, branding, advertising, large scale events for my clients.
Super.
And so it's a go-getter, a go-getter, aggressive field.
I bet.
And again, I've never seen anything like this before. And I was going to ask the same question: how would we apply this in hiring folks? Because again, today's young workers aren't built like they were back in the day. So
Exactly.
I guess you answered the question. We can ask those questions. We can provide a questionnaire for them to fill out. And again, some of them might think they're aggressive, but not really aggressive to, again.
Right. It's not about what you think. Right. It's about, it's literally, people, that's the one of the main things you see first off, even leaders. People on this call, you have a sense of who you are as a leader, and, you're probably, 70% right.
Yeah. And my another question is, how can we, because, once I bring somebody in, I try to mold them, nurture them, and groom them. How can we apply that to make them better employees opposed to just cutting them loose?
Well, it's a conversation. People are not deliberately at work, slacking usually. Unless they are quiet quitting, and you can identify that, or if they're just there slacking, you can get rid of them. But usually people they want to be engaged. They want to do it. And there's just a disconnect. Either, my boss doesn't get me. I don't get my boss. He or she's always XYZ, fill in the blank. Or these people I work with, I tell you, I hate, this. There's a reason. There's some nuggets there that you have to uncover. And what this does is it gives you a very standard, structured approach to interviewing and analyzing every individual contributor, including yourself, in the company, and then aggregating that, and then looking at it against the world of work you're dealing with, and mixing all of that up into some decisions based on all of that data that allow you to maximize those interactions. And by that, I don't mean force you to act like this person, but it's me to know, hey, listen, you require a lot of time, right? Because you are very, very, high on the patient's domain, right? Or you're my boss and you're super high on formality. So you're down with a lot of rules and regulations and policies. So I need to dot my I's and cross my T's when I'm dealing with you, and it's just helpful in that regard. And there's even more. We can, there's once you know the profiles, the objectives are, there's methodology. There's stuff that you do that's deliberate, that develops you and your team and your capacity to correlate and maximize the differences. The differences aren't bad. You just got to identify them and understand them. They're not bad. They could be great, as I hope I showed you.
Yeah, you did. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Dobbin, it's Diego, and I'm seeing a whole bunch of comments here about grooming and training and investing in staff, and sort of making that decision to invest in staff and your team when you may be at risk of them being poached away. So how do you make those decisions? And I know you've had those conversations in your own business. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? Supply demand. People are, you want to retain them, and you're concerned about training them and then them leaving. Unfortunately, you can't captivate you can't keep anyone captive. You have to, that is a risk you have to deal with. But here's how you counter that risk. And again, it's going to sound self-serving in the context of this presentation, and it is, but it's real. People leave for reasons, and it usually has to do with their manager. I want to be clear, but there are a lot of reasons people leave or think about leaving, and it's important to understand what those are before they take off. And so I always say that starts with an individual conversation that each one of you on the call has with each individual, so that it ought not catch you by surprise that anybody leaves if you're communicating. And if you're communicating and it still catches you off guard, then either they were holding it from you, which they might have been doing, but I guarantee you didn't see some signs that you should have, or that there was something that could have been done before to keep them. Because if you ask them the day after they leave, they've got no connection or no issue, telling you the truth, why you left, I guarantee you they will give you a super clear answer about for why they left that they could have given you 3 weeks ago or 4 months ago. And so it's a long-winded way of me saying, spend some time with everybody, understand who they are, let them understand who you are, and try to work around it, because there's not a lot that can not be overcome with if you've gotten someone that's already agreed to work with you because they're there at one point, unless there've just been some drastic changes in your organization, which there may have been, and maybe the person doesn't fit anymore. I mean, that's good too. But really understanding and having that one-on-one conversation. And it's more than just the interview. I've just seen things pop up. I mean, interview is important. I mean, but one of my fun things to say is, what can you learn in a session for 45 minutes? You got two people lying to each other. I mean, that's what an interview is. Overselling, overpromising to each other, usually. And so you got to do more than that. But it's helpful. It's a start. And by interview, I mean the interview to come into the company. Hopefully by the time they're in the company and you're having a conversation, that's not an interview, you're meeting with them, they're being truthful with you if they trust you. And that's another thing you got to establish is the trust. You want somebody to tell you what the problem is and you say, get the hell out of here, because they told you. You got to try to build that trust.
So
Thanks,
how would you, Donald Carter, Carcu Consultants, we do HR consulting, recruiting, and workforce development. And I have a client that we've been working with for over 9 years, and he consistently quiet fires people. So I'm trying to figure out, because it's really detrimental to his business now. And with it being detrimental to their business, that's detrimental to me because that's my client. So yeah. I don't want them to go under based on bad decisions, but I don't run their business.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, that's raising, again, when you said, I don't know if you were the one that asked that question earlier, or somebody asked a question about quiet firing. That's just really an interesting dynamic to me, because I'm not sure, again, I fully understand it. You just said this guy's quietly firing people. My question, I'd love to, if he or she were sitting here, I'd say, well, hey, what's the alternative? Why are you doing that? Why don't you just fire him? I mean, and the answer could be a lot of things. It could be, hey, I can't afford to because I need them. I need them here to do at least the little they're doing, but if I could get rid of them, I would. I mean, I've been there. And it's not cool, but that may be what the person's dealing with. But then that just means, you're building and reconstructing the bridge while you're crossing it. It sucks. I mean, you got to do it, but it's better to put a clean stop and say, like the young lady, I don't know if it was the Pretty in Paint, or was it someone before that said they're down to one person. You may have to get down to one client or one for a minute while you sort of parallel process to get these other folks up. But I don't want anybody working in my organization that I feel like my only solution is to quiet fire them. That's horrible.
And I'm trying to explain that to him. It doesn't help the rest of the organization to see that happen.
Right. Yeah, I'd be interested to understand really more behind that and why he or she is doing that, because I think there are better choices that are better all around. I mean, than that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. What else we have? Looks like we got 1 minute, or maybe, I don't know, I'll let Diego say, but I'm looking at my clock, this is good. This is the most, by the way, this is the most question and answer I've ever done in these sessions, which is great, which is really good. I mean, I usually don't have enough time. In this session, I had way more than I thought I was going to have time for, and I ended up having more time than I did. See how that works? You got to.
If you don't mind me asking, what exactly is quiet firing?
Yeah, I said asked that. I tell you what quiet quitting is. I'm guessing about what quiet firing is, but maybe someone who asked, one of the two or one person to ask that question can define it. But I have an idea of it, but I may not be right. Maybe somebody else can take a shot at answering what quiet firing is, or someone who's quiet fired somebody.
It's almost like they got quit. They didn't want to be there, and the people didn't want them there.
No, but that so how's it? So quiet. The way I think of quiet quitting, I'm trying to distinguish that from quiet fire. So quiet quitting is if I'm an employee and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to get this check. I'm going to come here. I'm going to walk in here at 9. And as soon as 4:59, I'm out. And I ain't going to think about this place. And I come back and answer no email. I ain't doing nothing. I'm going to do this. That's one form of quiet quitting.
So I would say
that's quiet. Now, what's quiet
can
fire?
Maybe give a shot at defining it. And I think it's mostly managers who maybe just have so much else on their plate. If it's a small company and you're the CEO also, and you're trying to run the ship, that you just don't notice. And I'm sure I've been on both the giving and receiving end of it because I also work for another company besides trying to run my own business. And I'm the one remote employee. So you can imagine I come to the office and they're like, wait, you're still here, you know? And I just
That's
watch
super
other
helpful.
employees get promoted and get involved and engaged in things. And I'm like, hey, you know, do I need to fly in again so you remember I'm here?
Yeah.
You know,
You know,
so
that's super
I don't
helpful.
think it's done with awareness. And that's
That's
where it's
super,
like,
super helpful.
as the manager myself in my own company, and I know that my employees, you know, they have discontents and they're not always telling me, you know, how do you reverse that from both ends?
Yeah, no, that I'm glad you said that because you know what's funny? I hadn't when you said quiet firing, because to fire someone is an active action. You don't know you're not firing someone. So when you said fire, when someone said that, I thought active, but when you said they may not know, they kind of forgot about you. I would change that to sort of, you know, we quietly forgot about you. I mean, because you just were virtual, you know, and that sounds like what's going on there. Oh, we didn't mean to not invite you to these. We just forgot about you. That I guess, yeah, feels maybe like a little quiet firing. They just kind of forget. But I like that unintentional firing. That's super, super helpful. That's more explainable to me than because that makes sense. You know, that part, I mean, not makes sense because it's right, but it makes sense. I get how it happens, but I didn't understand fully the mechanism behind quiet firing, but thank you. Diego, do we have any more time? Jared, how are we looking?
We are out of time. We do not have any more time. So this has been great. But we have to conclude and wrap up.
Great. Well, it was a delight to engage with you guys. This was a lot more fun because I got to engage with you a little less formally in this last part. So that's awesome. The one thing I always like to say to people, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm a big LinkedIn user, and I like to connect and hear what you guys are dealing with. So feel free to, reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if folks have questions they didn't answer or want to, explore any of this any further, I'm happy to do that anytime. So thank you so much. Mucho gracias. That's almost the extent of my Spanish, despite the fact that I'm from Texas. Actually, I do a little better than that, but that's about it.
All
I'll
right.
leave you guys here.